and this lets us further refine our colors. So I have this broken into some segments to give you an idea of where to pick colors from, because when you're going to pick highlights and shadows or specific colors for specific shading, you're going to want to pick from certain areas in this triangle. It's not just, hunt randomly for a color. That's not the best way to pick color. You want to have some educated guess as to where to go and then refine that. So we have our vertical value axis, then we have our horizontal saturation axis. And the way I like to shade, as I mentioned before, is I like to be really specific about how I tweak my colors, and I like to kind of shift things in a way to make them just pop more. So I'll give you an example here. Let's do a red sphere. Go ahead and make it maybe something like this. So this is our base color. So if we want something, if we want to shade something, the colors that we're going to pick are obviously not going to be anything bright, because it's going to be a shadow. So it's definitely going to fall somewhere below the line of the midtone. The midtone is just the general middle color. So that's kind of what I picked. It's right around here. So this is about where we're at right now in as far as the color of this sample. So if I'm going to shade it, I have to go below this point on the triangle. Anywhere below this point is going to produce a darker color. Now, whether I pick from the left or the right is going to dictate how bright that shadow is going to be or how dull it's going to be. And generally, I make my shadows duller because there's kind of less light going on there. The intensity of the light being diminished kind of makes it look more dark and more natural. If you'll notice, like at night, if you're walking around, things really aren't that bright. They're kind of all washed out in kind of one color. And when you're out during the day, everything really pops. Everything's really bright and really saturated. So if I pick pretty much any color from here on down, I'm going to get a good result for my shading. If I pick something that's more saturated, more towards the saturation side, and I do my shading, then I'm going to get a shadow kind of like that. And if I want to do a really bright highlight, I'll pick from over here. Anywhere from the top or from the midtone up is going to produce a highlight. So I'll put a highlight on there. I'm going to do another example here so I can show you the difference between bright shading and dull shading. So for this example, I'm going to shade going from kind of over here with some of these more dull colors. So I'm going to pick kind of a gray, dark red for my shadow, and then my highlight, I'm going to pick something kind of like this dull pink over here. So you can see the difference between these two examples now. We've got our bright one here and we've got our dull one here. What makes the difference is that in this top example, I picked colors that were more over on this side, and in this example here, I picked colors that were more over here. Now there's this curve that kind of starts to happen when you pick colors and you want them to be bright. If you want to follow a direction, I generally follow a curve that goes something like this. And that can be further clarified by making an example here. Let's go with something like this. And I'm just going to shade it real quick a little bit. Kind of show you how this works. So I'm going to take my color sampler tool, and when I hover over some colors and sample, my color picker here is going to move around in my color wheel and so are my slider bars. So I want you to watch where these values are on the HSV sliders, and I also want you to watch where this little target goes, and also where this, just pretty much where everything goes here. So I'm going to sample down here, and you can see if I start to move around the target starts to move, and you can see it's following a curve, right? That same curve that I described earlier. That's this curve here. So this is kind of the saturation curve. If you want something to be really bright, you're going to want to pick your highlights up here, and you're going to want to follow this line, this diagonal line here. And the further in you go towards this saturation point, the more intense the color is going to be. And then of course you want to follow the opposite line, diagonal line, back down. If you stay in the center and you don't go into this curve, you know, if your curve ends up being something like this, where it's really shallow, your color is going to be really dull. And I'll show you an example of that as well. I'm going to shade this one using dull shading. And then I'm going to sample over it, and then again watch what's going on here with all of these settings. So my target starts out. See how shallow this curve is here if you're watching the target up here. It's a very shallow curve. So it's only really going in these colors here. So this shading is going to be duller. Now up here, of course, again, if you watch that target again over here, the curve is a lot deeper. It goes in further, like in this example. So when you're picking colors, you want to follow this chart. And this kind of gives you some different descriptions of, you know, different categories of midtones and shadows and intensity and highlights and things. You've got your color intensity axis, which is again your saturation basically. And you've got your lighter and your darker. Just kind of trash these examples here. So those are your saturation curves. This again kind of just cuts out some of the extra stuff, because I know that can be kind of confusing seeing all those labels. If I'm going to pick highlights, they're generally in this range here that's highlighted. And if I'm picking shadows, they're usually over here. Now that'll change a little bit. Sometimes my shadows might be here, and you know, sometimes I might pick highlights from over here. Nevertheless, this is going to be your midpoint where all your midtones are, and then your highlights are going to be up here and your shadows are going to be down here. It's pretty easy. And again, with saturation, if you want something to be really, really bright and really pop and be very vivid, you're going to want to pick colors that are in this range here. And again, if I sample colors here, you can kind of see, if you watch this target, it's right here. Watch how it goes. It's following that curve, that same curve that I have illustrated here. So I know this is kind of a lot of stuff. It probably can be kind of confusing at first, and you know, you'll have to kind of practice with it to figure out exactly what I'm getting at here. But the whole point of this is, when you're picking colors, you don't really want to just pick colors at random. It makes it a lot easier if you know why you're picking colors, and the reason why we're doing things like shifting to make things lighter or darker is primarily kind of aesthetically, because it just makes the artwork pop more, but it's also kind of how light works in real life. You know, the wavelengths of light change, and so the color of the light changes depending on whether it's getting absorbed or reflected or what's going on around it. And so to make things look more naturally shaded, you're going to want to follow these principles. If you want to make artwork that's abstract and doesn't look realistic, go against all of these things. Or if you're making, you know, expressionist art or something with a lot of colors, and you want to figure out, you know, which colors are complementary to each other, well, now you know. You have an instant way of finding out. You pick your yellow here. Okay, what's complementary to it? Well, I look at my color wheel that I have here inside a painter, and I know that directly down from it is a complementary color, or a quarter of the way to that point is magenta, or on the opposite side is this aqua color. These are all complementary colors. So they're all going to look good together no matter what. Then you don't have to guess. You know what to pick. If you want to pick shadow, you know where to get your shadows from. If you want to pick a highlight, you know where to get your highlights from, and you know how to dull them and make them more gray or to make them really bright. So that's pretty much all you need to know about picking colors. And then other than that, you just have to do some observations in real life to match the colors that you want to get to, you know, your intentions. So hopefully this helps and it wasn't too confusing, and you can use this to make more interesting artwork with more character and more color.